Our speaker today, Mark Leibovich, is chief political correspondent for the New York Times Magazine. He's based in Washington, D.C. In 2011, he received the National Magazine Award. I'm doing a very serious introduction. If you've read the book, you know that I'm supposed to be witty, but I wouldn't even begin to attempt. He received the National Magazine Award for his profile of Politico's Mike Allen and the changing media culture of Washington. The prescient among us might have seen in that work a foreshadowing of the book we're discussing today with its very creative title, This Town, not plagiarized, Two Parties, I'm speaking to those of you who've read the book, Two Parties and a Funeral, plus plenty of valet parking in America's Gilded capital. Leibovich was previously a national political correspondent in the Times' Washington bureau. He's also worked at the Washington Post, the San Jose Mercury News, and the Boston Phoenix, and he's author of a book called The New Imperialists, a collection of profiles of technology pioneers. His bio notes that he lives with his wife and 3 daughters in Washington, and after reading the book, one may wonder how comfortable that setting is for him these days. Skimming reviews of This Town, it's striking that almost every review invokes a kind of duality, worded differently but with the same implication. The book is great fun, honest, and fascinating, and it's also horrifying in what it reveals about Washington's insider culture. Just to cite a few examples, John Oliver on The Daily Show. This town is funny, it's interesting, and it is demoralizing. I loved it as much as you can love something which hurts your heart. From the Denver Post, a rollicking, if disconcerting, read. From David Weigel in Slate, Leibovich has written a very funny book about how horrible his industry can be. And from David Schriebman in the New York Times, start to finish, this is a brilliant portrait, pointillist, you might say, or modern realist, so brilliant that once it lands on a front table at the Politics and Prose bookstore on Upper Connecticut Avenue, Mr. Leibovich will never be able to have lunch in this town again. Indeed, the most popular pastime in Washington since the book's publication seems to be finding out whether and how one has been mentioned, leading me to two and a half questions. Is anyone in that town still speaking to him, you? And aside from Richard Ben Kramer, whose idea was it to omit, not why isn't there one, but whose idea was it to omit an index? The half question is that the most frequently asked question at book talks? To tell
two of the most frequently asked.
Two of them. To tell a bit more about what he discovered in his anthropological exploration of the nation's capital, and perhaps to answer my 2+ questions, it's my genuine pleasure to present Mark Leibovich.
Thanks, Ruth. Thank you all for coming. I mean, I promise I will answer those questions as this talk wears on. And if I don't, you should just ask them. But I will say, just by way of just sort of addressing what you just said about whether I will ever have lunch in that town again, you'll note that I'm in New Jersey now. And I was in Montana until very early this morning. So I'm managing to eat lunch, but a lot of it's in airports, a lot of it's in pizza places and stuff like that. It's great to be here. I want to, before I get into my talk, I want to talk about a reference that Ruth made about the not plagiarized title. And if you read, not only read the book, but read all the way to the epilogue, you'll know what that refers to. But since no one ever asked me about it, I want to address what that means. In January, Mike Allen, who writes this very, very widely read email newsletter that everyone in Washington reads, announced that this book was going to come out, and he announced the title, This Town. And the title was my editor and publisher's idea, David Rosenthal. And so I get all these emails saying, okay, are you going to mention me in the book? What are you saying about me? What are you saying about my friends? What are you saying about my enemies? And if you take this thing out about me, will you put this thing out? I'll give you something about so-and-so. I mean, it was a classic study in Washington, thinking it's all about me. And later that day, in fact, late that night, I received an email forwarded from Jill Abramson, the editor of the Times, my Uber boss, which is from Sidney Blumenthal, a longtime writer. He went in and became a big Clinton loyalist in the White House in the 90s. And apparently Sidney, whom I've met once, wrote a play in the 90s called This Town. That, and you know, look, there are a number of songs called This Town. I mean, titles cannot be copyrighted. I mean, it's a fairly common two-word combination if you go into Google, if you go into Twitter. But Sidney thought that he invented the term This Town. And because he had written a play in 1995 or something that was apparently put on at the National Press Club. I've been reporting this book for 3 years. I hadn't a clue about this. But Sidney writes to Jill that clearly I knew about this, and clearly I was stealing the title, and I should not open myself up to a silly plagiarism charge. He actually used the word plagiarism in the subject head, which is not something you want your Uber boss to be reading first thing in the morning from anyone. And so then I read the email, and it was one of the most horrifyingly all about me, arrogant, disdainful emails I've ever read, and it wasn't even addressed to me. So I wrote in the epilogue about this because it made the point for me about how everyone in Washington is so self-involved. They think that surely this was their idea, surely this is about them, and surely there must be some aggrieved party involved, so we must have some big spat about this. But I then wrote that in future editions this book will be renamed The New Testament. And in subsequent mentions of this town in the epilogue, I credit Sidney dutifully. And then actually when the book came out, a woman who apparently has a blog called This Town, who is in Georgetown, thought that I stole the name from her. And anyway, there's all kinds of stories about that. It's really great to be here. It is great to be out of Washington. And one of the ironies of writing a book in which you detail, or which I detail, with a degree of detail and specificity of why Washington is so abhorrent, is I get to leave Washington periodically. And it's been an amazing ride. And I don't know, the bad news for everyone is that the government remains shut down. We are in our second week. The government, Washington, is not just dysfunctional, it is actively destructive at this point. The good news is it's been great for book sales. I would gladly give up some book sales if it meant getting the government working again. But this has been part of this grand marketing campaign I've had since the book came out in early July, in which every week the newspapers or any news from Washington would make the argument for me that Washington is a stew of vanity and egotism and people working on behalf of their own self-service as opposed to public service, which is what the city was supposedly built on. It's been an amazing thing to do. I mean, the other good thing about being surrounded by books is that I'm actually being surrounded by completed books. And I've been alone with this book for 3 years, and if any of you have tried writing a book or really anything of any length, you'll know, I hope you'll know, it's really hard, and it's really lonely, and it's really agonizing, and it's never, if it reads well, it's by either pure accident or a lot of hard work. And there was a lot of buzz around this book, and everyone was saying, who is going to be in it? What's he going to say? This will be the takedown. And I just couldn't talk about it. So now I can finally talk about it, and people can actually read it, and that's very, very good. New Jersey's a great place to be. It is home to some of the most compelling politicians around, Chris Christie being one of them. And what's amazing about Chris Christie is he is the subject of a fairly shortish section in chapter 11, towards the end of the book, The last third of this book is about the 2012 presidential campaign. And I followed Governor Christie around the Republican National Convention in Tampa for a couple days and just sort of watched him, and he was the total it man. I mean, everyone was following him. He had crowds every single place he went. And it's really deep in the book. And people come up to me all the time and say, tell me more about Chris Christie. And really it wasn't a significant part of the book, but I mean, I spent 2 days in his orbit, and they want to know more. They want to know, does this guy have a chance? Because Ted Cruz is now by far taking up the most oxygen in D.C. And I think that Ted Cruz himself, who is getting so much attention now and is arguably running what's happening now in the Republican Party and what's happening in Washington in general, is emblematic of one of the central points of this book, which is that getting attention, getting on TV, being outrageous, appealing to the extremes of your party can get you much farther than actually getting experience in the U.S. Senate, working together with colleagues, winning the respect of colleagues. I mean, I've talked to quite a few Republicans this week who are in the Senate and in the House who are appalled by this guy, and it just doesn't matter. I mean, Ted Cruz doesn't care. He's going to run for president, I think. He's getting more media attention than he could ever dream of for someone who's been in the Senate for less than a year, and that is the new calculus. And, I mean, he can do a filibuster for 21 hours, and C-SPAN's ratings will go up 500%, and, I mean, that's sort of the marketplace we're dealing in right now. So this book is, it's obviously timely, but it's also a product of a long time I've spent in Washington. I've been a political reporter in D.C. for a decade. I've been a reporter in D.C. for 16 years. And to be an insider in Washington, as I am, I live there on my own volition. I'm attached to a major news organization. I actually like living there. I love raising my kids there. I mean, it's a very pleasant place to be. But to be on the inside, to be invited to these parties, to have access to these people, to get to be on these planes, to get to be in this club, and this is one of the working titles of the book for a while, was The Club, means to be part of this large, permanent, feudal class of people in the political world. That term is Tom Coburn's term. He's a Republican senator from Oklahoma who has written and spoken quite eloquently about the insider class of Washington. Coburn's a Republican, he's quite conservative, but he sees the world in terms of people on the inside and people on the outside. And I realize that there's merit to that. The distinctions I draw in this book are not so much between Democrats and Republicans, they're between people in the club and people not in the club. I clearly am and I was and maybe still am, we can get into that, in the club. But I wanted to write what I thought was an honest, maybe tell-all, maybe deconstruction of what life in the club looks like. Because people outside of D.C. know intuitively that the city is dysfunctional, the city has been profoundly disappointing. But what I know from being on the inside is that there's a level of self-satisfaction, there's a level of self-celebration, there's a level of incredible wealth and greed and opportunism on the inside that looks quite different when you look at it up close and from the inside than it does from the outside. So the moment I decided that I would start writing this was June of 2008 at the memorial service of Tim Russert, who was obviously a giant of the news business. He was universally respected. People feared him. They liked him. He was an uber brand, I call him. He was more famous than most of the people he interviewed. He was a product of the media age. He was a show in his own way, but he was also a very good journalist. Tim dies at the dawn of this historic general election campaign in 2008. And I didn't know him well, but I knew him well enough to, being part of the club means you get invited to these big, massive memorial services, and it was the hottest ticket in town. And I remember people were on the outside of the Kennedy Center where the memorial service was held, asking if people had extra tickets. And it was actually, there were scalpers trying to get into a funeral. I could not believe that. But anyway, I was on the inside, and everyone was there. Everyone at the Kennedy Center was famous. You had the Clintons, you had the Obamas, you had the McCains, you had the Bushes. All the mafia families were there. And the journalists and the lobbyists and the hangers-on and the people you see over and over and over again on cable and on networks. usual suspects. And I was struck by how the spectacle just devolved into a cocktail party immediately. You had people angling to apply for Tim's job at his funeral. You had people trying to land interviews with Hillary Clinton. I remember seeing a booker for MSNBC's Countdown run up to Hillary Clinton and say, "Senator, we'd love to have you on the show tonight. Are you available?" And she, just because she wasn't in a very good mood because she had dropped out of the presidential race about a week before, didn't love Tim Russert. It's a whole other story. But she just said, "It is a pleasure to meet you," and she kept walking. And anyway, you had everyone working it. You had business cards being thrown around, people sucking up to David Axelrod and Robert Gibbs because they thought that they could get you to then Senator, future President Obama. And I remember just seeing that, and I'm thinking, this is now the tipping point. I mean, what is it going? I see these people everywhere. This is a bonfire of vanity, sort of in Washington style. And then there was a literal cocktail party on the roof of the Kennedy Center afterwards, where the schmoozing and the angling and the networking continued for many, many hours. I decided then that I would deconstruct this scene, and I would do it retroactively because I obviously couldn't see everything, but I would interview a lot of people who were there, talk about what their experience was, what they went through, what they saw, what they were struck by. And that became the first chapter of this. And as it turned out, as I stepped back, it was a moment where Tim Russert, the most influential journalist in D.C., died, and he was replaced essentially by Twitter. By Twitter, I mean this peanut gallery. I mean literally Twitter, but the peanut gallery of disjointed voices and just people trying to work it. I mean, it has never been easier to get famous in D.C. It has never been easier to become your own pundit, your own strategist, to develop your own, 20,000 Twitter followers and Facebook friends and, whatever. And just there's just so much air to fill and so much oxygen. And there's this rush to just outrage and punditry and getting noticed. And that became the currency. And Tim paid dues. Tim was there for years. He was a staffer. He researched the heck out of his subjects. No one worked harder. No one asked tougher questions. And then we had this. You also had the dawn of an economic collapse a few months later. You had the dawn of a presidential election that Tim would have loved. You had the Washington economy not hiccuping at all. I mean, it is the wealthiest metropolitan area in the United States. It's home to 7 of the wealthiest 10 counties in the United States. I wanted to deconstruct what that incredible wealth, what this incredible scene of valet parking, which is in the subtitle, meant, and to explore the disconnect between that and the despair in the rest of the country, not to mention the disconnect between the self-congratulation inside the Beltway and the revulsion for what's going on inside the Beltway, outside of the Beltway. So that's where it began, and I wanted to spend a fair amount of time just charting everything that happened and to really create what I hope would be a document to really distill life in Washington in the early 21st century. And I followed it over a 5-year period, or 4.5-year period. The first scene was the funeral. The last scene was President Obama's second inauguration. And it's, so I wanted to just take sort of an extended snapshot, and that's how it worked. And so that's how I started out here, and it took all these turns and twists, and but what's been timely about it is just this consistent level of disappointment, and this incredible ongoing party that continues in Washington. Now, I don't know if that's going on these last few months because I haven't been invited much anymore, but that's not true, actually. Well, part of it is because I've been out of town. But so that was the moment I decided that something, not only did I have a book to write, but something needed to be said. And to get to the other question, to get to the other most asked question is, will I ever have lunch in Washington again? What's the reaction been? Because I name names, I'm not always nice. Some reviews say I am actually cruel. Some reviews say I'm too nice. There's been, it has clearly been a controversial book, which frankly I welcome. Not so much controversy per se, but I welcome that it's made people uncomfortable, because Washington is, one thing you learn very quickly, is a very, very comfortable place. People might be fighting on TV, but quite often they're actually schmoozing in the green room and sometimes even going into business together. You have these bipartisan talking heads who will often, I mean, Terry McAuliffe, the former Democratic National Committee chairman, probably the future governor of Virginia, Ed Gillespie, the former Republican National Committee chairman, they became very close friends just by yelling at each other on TV periodically in the 90s. And then they took their act on the road. I mean, these corporations were paying them $50,000 a pop just to go to Houston or Tulsa or Detroit or wherever, just to yell at each other and do this kabuki act of left and right, which mimics what you see on TV every night. And the fact of the matter is, Washington does extremely well when nothing gets done. If an immigration bill were to pass tomorrow, you would have tens of millions of dollars of lobbying fees that would not be paid out, of consulting fees that would not be paid out, of shouting matches on TV that would never transpire, of ratings, of blogs, of outrage. So the energy that we see on TV is in fact partly theatrical, but it's just a part of a positioning that does not move the country forward at all. It moves careers forward, the local economy again. I mean, the shutdown's a little bit of a different category because, literally, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people are out of work. And that gets to another distinction I want to draw, which is this town. What does this town mean? This town does not refer, in almost all cases, to the people who are furloughed right now. It refers to the people who are making decisions about whether they should be furloughed or not. It refers to the people on TV who are arguing about, the shutdown. It refers to the elected officials and their staff people and the well-paid consultants who are doing, who are basically having this fight in a very public, in a very sort of positioning way, and their real lives are not affected at all. It also doesn't reflect the 24 men and women or the dozen men and women who lost their lives at the Navy Yard last month. I mean, these are very hardworking, very dedicated professionals that work, in the armed services. They go to work every day. No one knows who they are. I mean, and it was a terrible tragedy. But again, this is a much larger population of people who make this town, or who make Washington work, as opposed to this town players who I would say are part of this permanent feudal class, the political culture that is absolutely thriving at a time when so much money is in the political system, so much money is being devoted to covering the media, covering politics and the media. Corporations are throwing so much money into campaigns, into influencing the government. So you have this very, very fat, easy, and comfortable city. Even when it looks like it's coming apart at the seams, it's an emerald gilded capital. And that's one of the amazing things. I mean, one of the miracles of Washington, which is also almost one of the tragedies of Washington, is even in the worst of times, when a president's being impeached or when there's a terrible crisis or something, you go and there's a sense of continuity and these monuments to our history and things going on and our government working in a certain way. And that's always reassuring when a war starts, when there's a terrible thing happens, when a new president is inaugurated after a very, very harsh election. But it's also disconcerting when you have such an underperforming body of people. And then, again, it's the same sense of comfort you get day in and day out. So nothing really changes. And what I was trying to do with this book is create a dynamic picture of what an unchangeable ocean liner of a gilded capital looks like over an extended period. There is a scene towards the end of the book in which President Obama is becoming quite impatient with his team in the White House. This is about summer of 2011. The first debt ceiling negotiation with the Republicans had just ended after, what would be the first of many brinksmanship, hair-pulling moments, figuratively hair-pulling moments in D.C. And President Obama called together about 12 or 15 of his closest aides, some of them at his then fledgling re-election campaign in Chicago, some of his outside consultants, some of his White House aides, some of his people who have been at his side for the last 6 years. And he convened a weekly Saturday meeting in the Roosevelt Room to talk about strategy, to coordinate strategy. And he said in the first meeting, he said, look, I wanted to do this because I wanted to try to reclaim the trust, the idealism, the openness we had in our 2008 campaign. And the Obama people are endlessly nostalgic for 2008. It was a cohesive campaign. It worked. There wasn't that much internal division, at least that got out publicly. It was a moment when it was all hope and it was all potential, supposedly. And there's been a lot of internal White House intrigue and a lot of fracturing and a lot of people leaving and a lot of ill feelings, which has been pretty well documented. I add to the documentation of this a little bit in the book. But the president said, look, I want to try to reclaim what we had. I feel like we've gone Washington. I feel like we came here to change the place, and we've been in some ways co-opted by the place. And so I'd like to have these weekly meetings. I'd like to talk openly, and let's see how they go. And so he had about 3 or 4 of them, and they were great meetings. He said at one point, these are some of the best meetings we've had since I've been president. I feel like we're actually throwing ideas around. I feel like we're being honest with each other. I feel like we're actually reclaiming what we had in 2008. And in around the 4th or 5th meeting, the president felt comfortable enough to list 3 or 4 or 5 issues that he wished he had been more vocal on in his first term. And he wrote down on a yellow legal pad of paper, climate change, closing Guantanamo Bay, gay marriage, what else? Immigration, a couple of other things. And Jim Messina, his campaign manager in Chicago a couple days later, who was in the meeting, got this call from a reporter saying, so I understand the president wrote a list at this meeting in the Roosevelt Room last Saturday in which he talked about how he wished he had been more vocal on same-sex marriage and immigration and so forth. He basically had obtained a copy of the list. And this is bad. It means that the list leaked. President Obama, like all presidents, does not love leaks. As a reporter, I would welcome receiving a download from a meeting like that. But look, it was a breach of trust, quite clearly, from his team. And so the president was not happy. Everyone in that meeting was dreading what he was going to say at the next meeting because they knew he was angry. And he immediately addressed it at the next Saturday meeting. He said, look, guys, this was a really good meeting. I really enjoyed all of these, and I thought I trusted you. I thought, this was really working. But I hope these meetings can continue in some way, and if they do, it'll be without me. He gets up, and he leaves abruptly, and Vice President Biden stays behind and chews everyone out and said, guys, you let him down. What the hell, man? And he went on and on and on, and actually, the words of one eyewitness, he went on and on and on and on and on and on and on. He then walked out, finally, and there was this soul-searching meeting in his wake where people were yelling at each other, saying, who would do this? They were accusing others of leaking. But finally, Robert Gibbs, the former press secretary who was brought back to be part of this kitchen cabinet, was really upset. He said, guys, did we change Washington or did Washington change us? And that question runs very much through the narrative of this book, but I think also the Obama change brigade. And the reason I mention that is because his rise and his presidency has coincided with the 5-year or so narrative of this book. So the other theme about this is how Washington, like I said before, co-opts people. Another part of the Hope and Change Brigade of the Obama campaign, which was obviously a democratic, progressive enterprise, was the Tea Party. The Tea Party came into office in 2010. That was really where the energy was. It was from a similar kind of thirst for change, obviously from a different part of the ideological spectrum. And I remember a few days after they reclaimed majority of the House, Trent Lott, who is a character in the book, he was the longtime Senate Majority Leader, a Republican from Mississippi. He was interviewed. He's a lobbyist now, and he was interviewed, and he said, yeah. Once they get here, we're going to co-opt them, because they always get co-opted. And what he was meaning was this. Trent Lott is in a weird way. People would probably read this and say it was a villainous portrait of him, but I actually found him refreshing because he was quite honest about who he is and what his intentions were. And Trent Lott left the Senate in 2007. he immediately started a lobbying firm with John Breaux, his former Democratic colleague, a senator from Louisiana, who famously once said, my vote can't be bought, but it can be rented. And he was called by, I forget who it was a Democratic congressman. He said, he described John Breaux as a cheap whore. And Breaux took total umbrage at this, saying, I'm not that cheap. Which, again, is a victory for honesty, I guess. So anyway, they go into business together, and I was interviewing Senator Lott in his lobbying office a couple summers ago, and he was talking, like everyone does, about how much he hates Washington, because never do politicians talk more about how much they hate Washington than when they are running for re-election to get back to Washington, or when they are somewhere other than Washington and claiming to be happy to be outside of Washington. And I said, so Senator, if you hate it so much, why are you here? And he looked at me like I was crazy. And he said, because this is where the money is. I mean, where else am I going to go to make $4 million a year? I mean, I've only worked in politics my whole life. I grew up dirt poor in Mississippi, and I've been in the Senate for 30 years, and I was in the House for 10 years. And look, I don't begrudge him or anyone making a living. I mean, he's allowed. But I thought it was instructive that he would stay, and that would just he would be honest about it. But I mean, what's striking about that was, again, his honesty, but everyone stays, okay? 50% of all U.S. senators who are voted out of office or who retire or who say they've had absolutely enough go on to become lobbyists, okay? That figure compares to 3% in 1974, okay? 42% of all members of the U.S. House who leave Congress become lobbyists, also compares to 3% of them in 1974. People stay, okay? And it gives you an indication of the permanent class that they have joined. They've won a lottery ticket to be set for life because they've been elected to office. This is not what the founders intended. George Washington returned to his farm. I mean, he actually wanted to serve a little longer, but the other founders and people around said, no, public service is not for life. You're not supposed to keep doing this. You're supposed to go re-immerse yourself in your community. So he returned to his farm. Harry Truman, after he finished his presidency, went home to Independence, Missouri, and he and Bess Truman took this long road trip. They just drove around. They do what a lot of Americans do. They took a cross-country drive, and no Secret Service protection, no pension. Got busted for speeding on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, or whatever the Pennsylvania, I don't know if it was actually a turnpike then, a highway in Pennsylvania. And his idol was Cincinnatus, the Roman philosopher general, and who always thought that the crux of public service was just being a citizen again after you serve. And to me, that's completely been lost. I mean, now presidents are an imperfect analogy because they can leave and pretty much do anything these days. I mean, Bill Clinton, I don't think he's driving across the country. I mean, he's made over $100 million in paid speeches since he left the White House. Actually, I think it's over $120 million at last count. Again, it's a different marketplace. I don't begrudge him that. Actually, 120 I begrudge. I think once you get over 100, I start begrudging, okay? And you can juxtapose that with, again, the life appointment that people envision their service to be. And again, this is the city in which, this is the kind of city I'm writing about. It's a city in which self-perpetuation, staying in the game, staying as an insider, becomes the currency. And that extends very much to the media, by the way. If you are a media person who is seen as a Washington insider who knows how Washington works, you are set. You get invited onto cable. You get paid speeches, speaking opportunities. You get, you get all kinds of book deals. There's just a lot of currency to people who are seen as insiders. There's currency on the inside. There's currency out in the marketplace of people who are fascinated by how Washington works. I don't want to be one of those people. I wanted to do something completely different. I wanted to just, I guess, do it in a much edgier way because I think I've become very cynical. You're not a reporter in Washington for as long as I've been. without becoming cynical, and that's because you're spoken to in a certain way. You're spoken to in the language of obsequiousness, in the language of spin, in the language of lies. You're spoken to in a way that people outside of Washington don't speak to each other, how most Americans don't speak to each other. So I wanted to basically cop an attitude in a way that I do not. How's that for like? I'm appealing to the kids here. Cop an attitude. By the way, there was a huge mob scene outside when we came here of these people really well dressed, all like maybe early 20s, late teens, and I'm thinking, all right, I'm really really big here. This is great. But it turns out it was a fraternity social going on outside. So. Anyway, but I'm happy that everyone else is here. And you can probably go to the social afterwards. I don't know where it is. So actually, it's not a social. It's called date night. So anyway, that's sort of where I've been, and that's why I did this. And it's been a fascinating ride. I think the other most common question I get a lot is, well, actually, I'll answer the index question. This book does not contain an index. And the reason is there's something called the Washington Read. So in the vein of it's all about me, what people in Washington frequently do is they'll walk into some place like Politics and Prose or Kramer Books in DuPont Circle, and they will immediately go to the index, and they will see if they are mentioned. And if they are not mentioned, they will, or if they're mentioned just in passing, they will shove the book back in, and they will leave, and they will not read the book. Richard Ben Kramer, in his book What It Takes, which is this incredible book on the 1988 presidential candidates, it goes over 1,000 pages, does not have an index. And someone asked him, and he said, I want people to read the damn book. So David Rosenthal, the person who coined this town, or at least put this town on this title, obviously Sydney coined this town, also decided that he would put this warning on the back saying, this town does not contain an index. Those players wishing to know how they came out will need to read the book. Of course, 2 days after the book came out, the Washington Post published its own index of this book, listing the 800 or so people who are mentioned anywhere. And I went onto Twitter that day, and you get these things. Oh my God, I'm mentioned on 201. Does someone have the book? Can they check for me? What do they say about me? And this is actually a This Town sentence. I did my first TV interview about this on George Stephanopoulos' show 2 days after it came out. And Amy Klobuchar, the senator from Minnesota, walks into the green room because she was on before me, and she said, I haven't read your book yet, but I see that I'm on page 321. What did you say? And I'm thinking, what did I say about her? I think I was that? Anyway, it was a passing reference, so I was cool. So that's the index thing. And what else was I saying? Anyway, no, so that's why there's no index. Oh, and the other question I get is, what is the most memorable scene of the book? Who comes off looking best in the book? Because, despair, I want to give people some hope. I want people to root for some people. And, I'm happy with the mix of people laughing and being entertained and having fun with it, and also being repulsed by it. That works for me. But who comes off looking good? I will say this: the anecdote that gets the most comments on it takes place at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And the White House Correspondents' Dinner is the subject of a fairly long chapter in the middle in which I really describe the decadence of this thing. And it is this horrible banquet that's held every April, and it's just metastasized into this 5-6 day extravaganza of parties and pre-parties and after-parties and people just because a single banquet is no longer sufficient to celebrate the full achievements of the Washington media. We must do it over several days, and it's just a horrific abomination. And I hope it never happens again, but it will. In fact, the paperback is going to come out the weekend of that, and I'm going to go on a big soapbox and talk about how horrible it is, hopefully. But anyway, in 2011, the raid of Osama bin Laden's compound was scheduled for that weekend. And you'll remember it occurred on a Sunday, but the original plan was to do it on a Saturday. And that Thursday, a group of officials, the very small group of officials who knew about the raid, convened in the Situation Room to talk about timing and when they should do it. And they were kicking around ideas. And someone said, well, Mr. President, you can't do it Saturday because you're scheduled to speak at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And, if you don't show up and if some of the other principals don't show up, people will know that something's up, and especially all the reporters, and, people might suspect something. And Hillary Clinton, who hadn't said anything in the meeting to that point, looks up in the back and just said, fuck the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Can I say that here? Sorry. Okay. Actually, never mind. I got in trouble for saying that at some college. Anyway, and I thought that was a great moment for Hillary Clinton, and there were other moments that I guess that were not that great for her in the book, but you'll have to read the book. I don't like giving speeches and lectures because I'm a reporter. I'm used to being the wise ass in the back, taking notes. I much prefer a conversational style, so I hope people have questions. And if I didn't answer any of your questions, so let's make this interactive. So, yes, you first.
So, what do you think people say? Because of the money or because of the power? Let's say that put a cap on how much politicians make. Do you think they would stay still there just because of the money and the prestige?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, they stay there because there's every incentive to stay there exists. I mean, money probably being number one. People ask me all the time, what would you do about this? Okay. I would say, and I've come to this after thinking about it for a fair amount of time now, after getting the question a lot, if anyone were running for office and I were, watching them campaign, I would ask them, I would say, sir, madam, how long do you plan to spend in office? What are you going to do afterwards? And if they're running for re-election, I would say, what are you going to do if you lose? Now, obviously, if you ask what they're going to do if they're going to lose, their obvious answer is going to be, well, I'm focused on winning. I have no plans to lose, and blah, blah, blah. That's the classic, insult your intelligence answer that politicians give, and it's, you get used to that. I would say, look, I want you to commit. I want to know if you're going to come back here. I want to know if you're just going to join this club or if you're going to serve. I mean, it's not a term limits thing, but obviously, this book has been something that, people who are in support of term limits have taken, something from it. People who are in support of a third-party candidate have taken some. People who are in support of campaign finance reform have taken something from it. And I think this book makes an argument for all of that stuff. But I would ask that. But I think it's money. I think it's comfort. I think it's being someone. I mean, you still see these ghosts walking around the sidewalks. I mean, who just don't leave, no matter how much disgrace they leave in. I mean, Webb Hubbell, the general counsel to Bill Clinton, who left in a big cloud of disgrace. I saw him in my dermatologist's waiting room a few years ago. I'm like, oh, he's still in town. And you see like Gary Hart and people. Bob Packwood's there every day as the lobbyist. Anyway, yep.
As a trader to the insiders,
yes.
Do you expect to continue to be an insider?
Yeah, I'll tell you why. I mean, because it's in people's self-interest, because I'm attached to a major news organization, because people seem to think that, the other thing, I mean, the book's selling well. I mean, everyone loves a winner in D.C., right? I mean, no, I mean, it's true. I mean, you can do something that's objectionable to some people, and if people are buying it, figuratively, you're fine. I haven't felt any blowback that I've taken seriously at all. I mean, the thing I was very anxious before this book came out because, one, I think everyone's anxious before a book comes out because it's like throwing something that you've, birthed into the world and having everyone take shots at it, right? I lived in fear of some kind of factual challenge. I lived in fear of just being scrutinized and everything. No one has denied the premise. I was hoping for an argument here. I was hoping that someone would defend the way of life that I describe here, but no one did. I mean, the vein of the criticism has been, how dare he? How dare an insider speak critically of other insiders? This is in violation of the unwritten rule that we all live by in Washington, that we don't give away the secret handshake. And I'm all for playing by the rules and honor and everything, but I think these unwritten rules have gotten us in a lot of trouble, and they have distorted some of the really important truths about how this capital has evolved and how it works and doesn't work. So I don't anticipate it'll be an issue. It just hasn't been, and if it is, so what? I'll be okay. Yes, Ruth.
So I I kept thinking about Thackeray and Vanity Fair when I read this, although, you're not doing a satire, really. But if you were an insider in, I don't know, maybe you've been in other institutions, corporations, the church, God help us, academia. Does humanity look that much different? And my second question, I'll get the other one out there at the same time, is because I spent my life at an institute of politics at a university, and one of our missions is, the broad term is educate. What we try to do is attract young people to public service, and in the kind of traditional basic belief that it's a very important thing, and of course, I think about doing. It's hard. I mean, if I assign this, and then
you should definitely assign it. But I will give you an answer to that, and I will say, I mean, okay, these are two, I think, very central questions to what I want to talk about. I mean, the first question is, it's sort of, the two parts of this that I've been getting a lot is, hasn't it always been thus? Hasn't Washington always been a swamp of opportunism and swamp? And don't you see this mimicked in state capitals, in Hollywood, in Wall Street, in academia, and places like that? The answer is yes. I mean, the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, this is my theater, and I think Washington is different. I mean, Washington supposedly, again, was the city built on public service. Okay, I mean, Hollywood, Wall Street, I mean, there's tons of ego, vanity, greed there, but, Washington is for keeps. Washington was supposedly, built on a higher calling, and it's also paid for by taxpayers, okay? So that, I think, puts it on a different plane. And so, yes, I mean, there are obviously pieces of the human nature, everywhere, but this is, I think, when it's concentrated in this particular environment, there's a distinctive story to tell. And the other part about young people, and this is the real tricky and I think arguably the most important thing I've been talking about, is, why do you not just, opt out? And why should anyone go to Washington and try to join this world? And which is interesting, because a lot of people have said, you paint such an exhilarating picture, it looks really fun, it looks really glamorous. I had no idea, I mean, it looks cinematographic. I want in. I mean, yes, it's despairing also. I mean, so there's been a mixture of those two things. But one of my favorite people in Washington is a New Jerseyan, Rutgers graduate named Susan McHugh, who grew up working class in Burlington County, came to Rutgers, just worked really, really hard, a total idealist, became chief of staff to Harry Reid for many, many, many years. Still very close to Senator Reid. Starts a lot of foundations. Is like a great do-gooder. She's on all these boards. She starts, there's a lot of women in politics groups. I mean, she's just a terrific, terrific person. And there are people all over Washington like that. And one of the big critiques of the book is, all right, well, why don't you have the chapters at the end in which you do two things? One, you tell us all the good people and all the good, hardworking people who are making a difference. I didn't do that, but they exist, and they inspire me every day, especially the young people. I meet them on campaigns. And we just need them all to keep coming, because this hope and belief in the system will ultimately be the salvation. I mean, and hopefully, things like this shutdown, hopefully, with the inspiration of candidates and the right kind of leaders coming along, it will actually move the place forward. I mean, there's this the quote, I guess the Martin Luther King quote, which is the arc of history is arc of justice is long. Okay, help me out here. It tends to move. It's long but endurance first. Thank you. This is good. It's been a long day. But yes, no, I do. I mean, President Obama said change does not happen quickly. It happens very incrementally. And I mean, part of, I think, making change is learning how to tell the truth in a way that might not be comfortable. And, if I've added a tiny piece to that, great. But I don't know. I mean, I maybe it's a leap of faith, but I just do have it, and I meet these people. So maybe that'll be my next book. No one will read it, but yeah.
Are what I take away from the book a little bit is that, I think it's highlighted by what's going on in Washington right now with this seductiveness of power and wealth and everything like that, creates such a disincentive to do something that will cut you off from that. Do something that's truly in the best interest of the country if it's going to hurt you, kind of like it. To me, I was thinking the other book I was thinking as an anthem to the book was kind of a profile of courage. You know?
Yeah.
And to the extent that we've lost that piece, and I realize that kind of an equal-handed treatment. Do you see any difference on the left and the right between a willingness to try to find common ground, a willingness to give up some power and authority to do what's right for the time?
No. I mean, I don't. I mean, it's a very, I mean, there are the two parties of opportunism, true believers, good people, horses' asses. I mean, it really does come down the middle. I mean, there are, again, the left and the right have tried desperately to reclaim this book. I mean, which is good. I mean, I'm happy to have lefties and righties buying the book. That's all good. But no, I mean, look, it's insiders versus everyone else to some degree. I mean, there's an expression: there's no such thing as Democrats and Republicans in Washington anymore, only millionaires. And again, I mean, obviously there are some very deep ideological divisions, but you have to realize that the Tea Party and the people in Congress who are, violently opposed to any kind of deal with Obama right now are, one, largely, in control of a big part of that party, but they also have no real fear of their electorate because they're in gerrymandered districts. They're probably going to be, I mean, their biggest fear of losing their job is probably by, through a primary opponent in the Republican Party than through any Democrat. And that gets to the question of, Chris Christie. I mean, is Chris Christie seen as too much of a centrist, basically, to ever get through Iowa, ever get through the Republican primary process? And I don't know. I mean, I hope he tries. I think it'll be a really fascinating and important argument to have or to watch. So, yep. Yeah.
Do you think there's ever any chance to describe just collapse of its own vanity, greed, loathingness, and inefficiency and all that?
Yeah, wouldn't it be great? I mean, I think. No, I get your point. It's a great question. It's a question.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. The question was, is there a chance that the world I describe here could just collapse of its own greed, of its own vanity, of its own bloat? Bloats. All of these are perfectly apt words. I would like to think this isn't sustainable because, again, you have a dramatic disconnect between the revulsion outside and the bloat and the continued, bloatiness that we're seeing. Okay, and I mean, I do think you see a hunger for something that will help it collapse in the way that people will gravitate to anything that rings authentic in a presidential candidate, whether it's Herman Cain or Michelle Bachmann or Ross Perot or Barack Obama. I mean, these are obviously radically different people and of different credentials and different ideas, but I mean, so that hunger plays out very, very much. And that's one of the reasons I think Christie is so interesting, because Christie, I mean, there has always been an appeal of the person who promotes him or herself as the truth teller, okay? The buck stops. I'm going to tell it like it is. I mean, John McCain's Straight Talk Express was a great sort of recent example in 2000. And, there's a great appetite for that. I mean, Christie, and this is in the book thing a little bit. I mean, the question is, how well does that wear? The question is, I mean, does the I'm the only honest person in all of politics act wear thin after a while? But no, I would like to think it would collapse. I would like to think that, but I just don't. I mean, the more familiar impulse is despair, but I hope so. I mean, I think that if it doesn't collapse in a productive way, I mean, I just don't think this is sustainable. I mean, I think there are so many infrastructural problems that aren't being addressed in the country, whether education or immigration or, some of the entitlement issues. I mean, it's so. I mean, the short-term gain, the self-perpetuation, eventually is going to have a tab. So, I don't know. It's not. I mean, I don't have a. I mean, I would like to think so. So yeah.
So you write about the Emerald Gilded City, and you expose to all of us the greed and the bloat. And I think that you're taking a frank look at it. But the people who read your book in Washington, after they scan curiously looking for their own name,
Yeah.
do you think that they can carry your message, the larger image that you're presenting, and would they agree?
You know, that's been one of the real amazing things about this book. A lot of people agree. I mean, on the inside. Now, whether they feel shame after agreeing, whether they are feeling enough, to actually change anything about how. I mean, a number of people have said, you actually got me to think about myself and about my role and how I talk to people and how I approach life here. Now, that's been amazing. Now, I got a letter, an email from a U.S. senator, former U.S. senator, who is a minor player in here. His ilk certainly does not come off well. And I saw the email from him, and I fully expected to be chewed out or some kind of defensive crouch. And he said, your book was amazing. It was like that old mirror I have in my old bathroom drawer where I look in it and I see all these warts and unseemly things and wrinkles, and I don't like to look at it, but it's important that I do, and I hope you'll write a sequel. And then there's someone else who I don't think comes off terribly well in the book, who wrote me this email not long ago, about a week ago. He said, I finally read your book. I've always been if you're not laughing, you're crying kind of guy, so I appreciate the laughter and the fun. I just wish it weren't so damn true. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure I'm being trashed behind my back. I don't know what parties I'm not being invited to. I'm certainly getting invited to parties. I don't care. I don't like these parties anyway. It's the same people over and over and over again. I like coming here instead. But yeah, I mean, that's been kind of gratifying. I obviously, I don't know if it will push anything forward, but I've been pretty stunned by how. I mean, I've been both disappointed by how undefensive people have become, because I was really hoping for an argument, but I've also been, I guess, sort of heartened by people actually, at least trying to come off as like looking at this world honestly. So, yep.
I wonder how you feel women fare in this town. Is there equal opportunity, opportunism?
Yeah. I mean, well, I would say this. I mean, this town is a male-dominated town. I mean, politics is a male-dominated industry. Media is a male-dominated industry. I mean, this town is allegedly, very progressive. I mean, Washington's a very theoretically progressive city, but I mean, Politico, which is the industry rag that everyone reads, they say we want to be the source of politics, and we want to be for politics what ESPN is for sports. So essentially their mission is to cover politics exhaustively like it's one big sport. And, it's like one big boxing football analogy if you read the thing, and I do. I mean, they have some very good reporters, but they bring a very male and I think traditionalist sensibility to what they do. So, yeah, I mean, you talk to a lot of women in politics, they would say the same thing. Yeah.
So you talk about these politicians, like members of the House, senators that are part of the club. But what about politicians that, like Governor Christie in New Jersey, or Antonio Ramos in Los Angeles, or Louis Capito in San Antonio? Are they part of the club, or is it mainly just Washington?
I mean, the book focuses on Washington, but I mean, again, the club has tentacles elsewhere. I mean, look, I mean, I do find people out in the States and mayor's office to be quite refreshing, just because it's the tangible. I mean, you can actually do more. You actually see more being done. I mean, people seem to work harder. I find, I do find community-mindedness and a more community-based approach to be somewhat, inspiring in a way. But yeah, I mean, look, I mean, Chris Christie is a brand, right? I mean, he's going to write a book, or has he written a book? He'll write a book. I'm sure he'll write a book. It'll be called something like How We Can Move Our Country Forward, and it'll be like a blueprint for his 2016 presidential campaign, and he'll get a big advance, and Bob Barnett will represent him, and you can see that all happening. So, yeah, look, I mean, everyone wants to go national, especially if you want to be president. I mean, you can't be president of New Jersey, much as I guess you'd like to be. So yeah, I mean, look, and I mean, it's always interesting to watch people, once they become, once they move to the Capitol. I mean, Cory Booker he was profiled in the Washington Post style section a couple of months ago, and I was I was happy because in the lead, they asked him how he's preparing for life in Washington. He said, "I'm reading This Town, and I'm amazed at what I'm saying, and I can't. It's my bedtime reading. I listen to it on tape as I fall asleep every night." And I'm like, "Yeah," and it's before the fold too. It was great. Although that piece sort of helped reinforce the message that maybe he's counting his chickens a little before they're hatched, and maybe he should be focusing on campaigning more. And anyway, I was grateful for that. Yeah. Oh, no, I'll get you next.
If anyone gives you a hard time about the book, just tell them you got to put them in the second edition.
You know, I think there's probably, that's sort of in the back. Well, actually, I do have a new introduction I have to write for the paperback. People don't know that, though. Yeah.
My question was, part of the problem, as you sort of pointed out with gerrymandering, we've got two completely different parties, if you will, national and local. Mm-hmm. With the gerrymandering, you've got a minority that controls enough of one house to destroy everything, and you've got perhaps the majority, I think it's the majority, who doesn't quite know how to handle it. How do you see that ever getting resolved, other than the next census?
Well, I mean, if you look at it, I mean, first of all, what you just described, is going to, put Democrats at a progressively bigger advantage in winning presidential elections and increasingly statewide elections. So, the reason a lot of these districts are so safe for the Republicans right now is because this is a little known part of the 2010 elections was that they won so many governor's races and state legislative races, which puts them in charge of essentially drawing up congressional districts, which gives them a hammerlock on a big part of their majority. So I think if you were to ask everyone in Washington if they were king or queen, the three things they would do to change everything. I mean, truth serum, anonymous ballot. One, you would say doing something about gerrymandering. I mean, unless you have real hardcore Republicans who see that as like their lifeline right now, right? You'd probably see people say, we need to do something with campaign finance. Citizens United is, Republicans are not in any hurry to overturn it. But I mean, the fact is, you have Democratic and Republican members of Congress and the Senate spending 5-6 hours a day in these boiler rooms, right a block from Capitol Hill, or a block from the Capitol, making these cold fundraising calls. And that's just not a good way to spend your public service days. I'm sorry. I read that story over and over and over again. I mean, it's been in every newspaper in the country, and it gives me a headache every time. I don't know why I keep reading it. The third thing would be, what would the third thing be? I'm having a Rick Perry moment. I think the third thing would be, well, I mean, Democrats would say filibuster. I mean, everyone talks about filibuster reform when their side is in the majority. So I sort of take that with a grain of salt. Republicans talked about that in the '90s, or in the last decade. So anyway, no, I mean, there are a lot of things. I mean, I don't think people would. I mean, the term limits conversation is different. I think a lot of Republicans were term limit people in the '90s. A lot of the Gingrich people came in on this. Part of their platform was, I'm for term limits. They win the majority. More than half of them went back on their term limits vows. About half of them are still in Congress now, almost 20 years later. So again, this makes my self-perpetuation argument for me. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think people know intuitively what's wrong. It's just that there's just not a lot of self-interest. The self-interest veers in the other direction from the inside. Yeah.
So you describe yourself as being cynical, and I'm just curious as to what your motivation is to continue to do what you do.
Good question. Yes, I describe myself as cynical because when you're a reporter covering these people in Washington for as long as I have, you become cynical. I'm not entirely cynical because I like to think that this book has come from a place not of despair, but of idealism. I mean, I think what a good journalist should do is to try to hold a mirror to a culture and do it in the most honest and, if need be, harsh way as possible, and help that it shines a light for people on a world that, hopefully, might be despairing to some degree, but ultimately can bring this world to a better place. That brings the question of, okay, Mark, what would you do? where are your prescriptions for all this? And then I throw my hands up and I say, hey, I'm just a reporter. I don't do the prescriptions. I'm not the solutions guy. There's not a chapter in the back of this in which I lay out the 10 bullet points on how we can make our capital work better. And I'm sure there are books like that in here. But no, I mean, look, I do think I'm an idealist. I'm a cynic from experience, but I'm an idealist, I think, at heart, and I think that is still true. And I'm raising my kids there, and I watch, them at the monuments, and it's this beautiful, inspiring, historic place to raise them. And every day, two of my daughters, go to a school that is on the route of the vice president's motorcade to the White House every day. And I remember back when Cheney was the vice president and now Biden's the vice president. It doesn't matter who's the vice president in the car. You just see these kids in the school just with their nose pressed up against the glass, and they're just sort of stunned at this momentous spectacle that goes right in front of their school every day. And it gives you a sense of how lucky they are and we are to sort of have our noses pressed up against the glass of this incredibly important and historic work that's supposedly being done here every day. And so I'd like to think that this comes partly from a desire for them to feel proud of the capital, of their hometown, of the country that we're at the seat of. And so yeah, I guess you'll just have to believe me. But I do think that writing honestly about it is my first job as a journalist. And look, again, I welcome any discomfort because I think that that's part of my job too. So, yeah. Next. I'll get you next. Go ahead.
A lot of people have turned away from politics because they just think that every politician is the same. Do you think this book has encouraged young people to go into politics, or just discourage them to move on with their lives and don't turn around?
I think this book has awakened a great, a great era in public service in this country. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. I hope. I've actually had a fair amount of people saying I want in, and I think that they have said they want in for the right reasons. I don't think they want in because they want to be a character in the real life West Wing. There's a whole chapter in here about this guy who named Kurt Bardella, who has came to Washington having been steeped in politics just from watching West Wing, and he grew up just idolizing President Bartlett and Josh Lyman, and no real life presidents like Ronald Reagan or John F. Kennedy or anyone. And he's a sort of empty vessel, but he was very honest. He said, I'm not so much a D or an R, I'm an O. And I'm like, what's O stand for? He said, opportunist. And he became a very, very visible press secretary for Darrell Issa, a very, very powerful Republican committee chairman, for reasons I lay out in Chapter 8. He loses his job in part because of his willingness to share emails from people and members of Congress and reporters with yours truly. And he loses his job. He gets his job back 3 months later. He just started his own shop. He emailed all his Facebook friends and all of his friends the other day and said, hey, I'm making my Fox News debut to talk about the shutdown. I hope you'll tune in, and it's all over his Facebook page. And anyway, you can read all about Kurt Bardella. But look, you should go to Washington. I can tell you. I don't know if you want to go to Washington, but there are really great young people, especially, and actually middle-aged people, old people. And if you don't go to Washington, stay in your community. It's just, I do think public service is not only noble, I think it's extremely important. And I think that hopefully, yes, despair might be appropriate, but I also hope that it would eliminate the need for some kind of, just to keep fighting. So, but, you and then you. Well, actually, I know you. Are we out of time or? Oh, okay. All right. Well, let me take your question, and then I'll take your question, Randy.
It's actually very much a follow-up on what he was asking about. Are there any politicians, media figures, journalists who people widely acknowledge, if they're not good or pure, are they at least not terrible? People are
Look, I want to say this. People are complicated. No one is good or terrible. I don't see this book as like a series of profiles that damn individuals. I see it as hoping to damn the system and hoping to damn just the whole operation and the whole, just basically the world that sucks people in. Another working title of this book, unplagiarized, was Suck Up City. which I ultimately decided. I mean, it sort of gets to the sycophantic nature of so much in politics, but it also gets to the being sucked up into the world of politics and sucking up all the, nutrients in the barnacle, like barnacles and the money in the system. Ultimately, I decided it was too crass and not I didn't want my daughters saying my dad wrote the book Suck Up City, But no, I mean, look, Ted Kennedy was someone I loved getting to know. I mean, Tom Coburn was someone I've loved getting to know. These are two people who could not disagree more. One is a liberal Democrat, one is a very conservative Republican. They worked pretty closely together. People come in all flavors. I mean, it's just not black or white. People are complicated in Washington as everywhere. And, I think if there's an indictment here, it's maybe a skating profile of a system. So, yes.
The corruption and self-vanity that you talk about in the book, do you think it's inevitable, or is it just the wrong people getting into politics? I know some of my fellow students and I work out of the Eagleton Institute, and I like to think that we all want to change the world, maybe sometimes too idealistically, but
No.
between now and then that...
Hopefully nothing. Hopefully you'll keep that. I mean, look, the best people I know in Washington, there are a lot of people I know in Washington keep that, and they remember that. A lot of them remember that, but they ignore it because, Goldman Sachs is paying them, $500,000 a year on a retainer to think something else or argue for something else. I mean, Richard Gephardt, who was a character in the book, who was one of the champions of organized labor, one of the great heroes of labor when he was running for president twice. I mean, he gave some of the most inspiring political rallies I've ever been to in Iowa. He then reversed pretty much not every, but many positions he held in Congress when he went on to become a lobbyist, and people were paying him on the other side. And Richard Gephardt's making $7-8 million a year now. He's got a nice home in Napa. What's that? Yeah. So. Look, I don't I don't know if he's still idealistic or not, but I think, no, people, you got to keep it. I mean, look, for as much as this might be a picture of despair, and I've said this before, I do see pictures of hope routinely. I mean, again, especially on campaigns when you get out of Washington. I mean, I love going to Iowa every 4 years. Some great volunteers there, both local people and young people from all over the country, both sides. And, yeah, so just be mindful of it. And I mean, I also think that it's important, if you can, to maybe do something else, work elsewhere before going to Washington. I mean, I think I'm 21 years old, 22 years old, I'm going to go to Washington. I mean, it's fine, there's only opportunities there, but no, I mean, there's something to be said for immersing yourself in a community that you don't know anything about, because it's intimate, it's completely new, it might be completely uncomfortable, but it's, in some ways more real. So, Randy.
Yeah, and I think we do probably have maybe two more questions after this, not to insert myself in there, but I will. Can you describe the reaction at the New York Times when you spoke to your editors that you were going to write this book, how supportive they were, and then just because I love reading these stories and hearing these stories, if there's anything that you left out in the editing process.
The unplugged version? Wait for volume 2.
What you've observed since then that you would absolutely have included, had the timing worked out.
Interesting. First of all, I mean, the Times has been really supportive. I mean, I had the top editors read the whole thing, and I was worried. I mean, I thought, this is a bit of an edgy book, and it's not a typical Times kind of. It's not a typical Times reporter book. I mean, it's a little bit. I don't know if you'd call it edgier. It's not. It's not a historic treatment of 17th century France. Not that that's what my colleagues write, but I mean, it's different. But they were so supportive. Jill Abramson read it. She loved it, and I couldn't ask for more. Time. I rescued some, did a lot of my fact checking on company time. Don't tell anyone that. That's off the record. But so they were great. And what did I leave out? Oh, so much. I mean. The fact-checking process was quite rigorous because I was afraid of, all kinds of things, like getting sued, being wrong, being attacked. I mean, Washington has a real playbook for discrediting books that it doesn't like, and you see the White House go to it. I mean, no matter who the White House is, they'll they'll say the book is riddled with errors, and they'll have someone, write the 10 bullet points of things that might not be errors, but they might be in a gray area, and you might have gotten a job title wrong. But no, I mean, talk to me afterwards. No, I mean, there is stuff. I can't think of any offhand. I mean, I can, but I better save it for the next one. How's that for a completely unsatisfying answer? So why don't we take, one more question, and then we'll wrap up. Yes, then everyone must buy the book. No, actually you don't, but I'll sign books for however long you want me to sign them for. So, yeah.
On a lighter note, I'm struck by the Hollywood version of Washington today. It's exciting and so forth. And it recalled to my thinking one of the Alsop brothers in the 60s describing Washington as having the nightlife of Indianapolis.
That's not true anymore. I've never been.
It's such a dramatic change.
Yeah, I mean, the nightlife is, I don't know what Indianapolis nightlife is like, but I think I take the point. I mean, the nightlife is, a lot of it is party-based. I mean, not political parties, but like, hey, there's a book party for so-and-so tonight, or there's an opening for so-and-so tonight at the museum, or there's a lecture over here, or, here we all are in Iowa in the same hotel bar for the 20th night in a row. And, there's a summer camp quality to it. Yeah, Washington's pretty conservative in its own way. It's not, I wouldn't call it freewheeling in any way. You have a lot of class president types. So, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Something I'll ask you, because you may have no idea at all, but what strikes me about the television set, the Hollywood set, quality of Washington, everything's a performance. It seems to be a minor thing, but I always remembered when Army generals went before Senate committees, they always wore basic greens because it was a workaday look they wanted, a lot of gravitas.
Right.
And now they...
That's why I'm dressed like this.
Yeah. But I'm struck by they all wear these dress blues now, and the so-called tossed salad, it soon will look like this is tossed salad, this is scrambled egg. They'll soon begin to look like NASCAR drivers.
Yeah, I don't even know. I didn't even realize it.
I'm struck by the fact that it's very dramatically different from the old, very serious look.
Right. Yeah, well, look, television, it's a TV show. Look, you go to, New Hampshire, okay, the New Hampshire primary, okay, let's all go into the diner and follow the candidate in while he, makes small talk with the voters and finds out what they really care about and blah, blah, blah. You have 4 voters in the diner at the same table and maybe 40 cameramen around them. It's like one big soundstage. It's a joke. Part of what I like to do in the book, but also in my reporting in the Times, is just to pull back the curtain farther, just to name the absurdity of this. And I think what you're talking about is of a piece for that. But no, the funeral scene, I talk about the telegenic grief pose, just the way that people or politicians are expected to carry themselves at a somber event that they know is being televised, and you have people positioning for the camera so that they can look serious, alive on MSNBC, C-SPAN, whatever. And no, some people have said that Congress was ruined when C-SPAN cameras were allowed in, because it became much more of a TV posturing opportunity than actually a governing, deliberative body. And Chip O'Neill in 1979 was the first to allow it, and I think he said he regretted it. And Mike McCurry was the first White House press secretary to allow cameras into the White House briefing every day in around 1996, and he said he regretted that because it turned out, it turned what was a pretty serious dissemination of the day's news into a photo op and people trying to get on TV and ask the most soundbitey question and get noticed. So it's all related, I think. Anyway, thank you all very much. This is great.